So, very good morning to one and all. I guess we are already familiar with the basics fundamentals of cloud. So, we'll be taking about security issues in cloud. To start with, what will be the basic objectives of the discussion? Within the objectives, the very first thing is we'll be talking about the security issues pertaining to SaaS, software as a service, then PaaS, platform as a service, and EaaS, infrastructure as a service. So we'll be separately dealing with all the issues which exist in all the three basic models. Then we'll be talking about what are the different security threats and vulnerabilities that exist in cloud. Then what is the relationship between the threat and the vulnerability? That means which vulnerability gives rise to which kind of threat. And towards the end, we'll be talking about the different measures to overcome these security issues. So to start with, we all know what is cloud computing. So just to brief it, cloud computing basically is, what is cloud computing? Yeah, it's a question actually. Perfectly. So basically, if we talk about cloud, so we say that it is like taking something on lease, using it, and then releasing it. So if you talk about any application or service, so what we do in case of cloud is we are just going to pay for the duration we use the services or the application. The moment we are done with whatever service you are using, you release the resources. So it is based on basic is pay per use. Like in order to come to NITRRR, you have two options. One is purchase a car, then come to NITRRR. Second is go for a taxi and come to NITRRR. The first is where you are actually going to be the owner of the infrastructure. So that is going to be a costly method. The second is where you are actually going to take the resources on lease. You are hiring a taxi, you are hiring services of third party. You come to the venue and you pay for the duration you use the services. So this is how we can actually relate cloud to a journal real life scenario. So it says cloud computing, it basically appears as a computational paradigm as well as a distributed architecture. And the main objectives is to provide secure, quick, convenient data storage. Apart from that, what basically comprises cloud computing? Cloud computing is made up of few fundamental things. Now, if you talk about few fundamental things, these will be the five essential characteristics of cloud. I guess you have already discussed. The characteristics are broader network access, rapid elasticity, metered service, resource pooling, and on-demand self-service. It includes three service models, SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. Includes three deployment models. Basically four deployment models: public, private, hybrid, and community. Just to start with cloud computing, we basically say who is actually going to use it. Any user for whom security is an issue, that user is actually going to use cloud computing. Now, when we talk about cloud computing in this particular sense, we say that if as an individual or an organization, I am looking for security issues, I'll have to use large amount of finance, because finance comes into picture whenever I'm going to have certain solutions. So if an organization, single organization is looking for security and it is trying to handle security, in that particular case, the financial burden rises for that particular organization. But if there is a central organization, the central organization is looking for the security measures. In that particular case, the organization is going to have revenues from large number of participating sub organizations. So in that particular case, there is a possibility that security measures will be more strong or better security measures will be there. But again, you have certain issues like vendor lock-in, because ultimately if you are going to take security services from third party, that means you'll be totally dependent on that particular third party. So Chase, cloud computing makes sense if your own security is weak. That means as an organization, if I am looking for security solutions, I am not able to provide that much security into my application or to my services. Like for software designing, whenever you go for any software application development, you have a software by IBM that is called as AppScan. Now that software, what it does, it looks for all the possible vulnerabilities. Now what it is going to do is, it is actually going to look for every code, every line in the code, and test for every possibility of vulnerabilities. And then it gives you a summary of all those vulnerabilities along with the type of attack which is possible, or type of vulnerability, along with which in which file that particular vulnerability exists. So that means as a single organization, if you are looking for security measures, financially it is going to be on a higher side. So if you yourself are suffering from first cost issues, second is you are not able to provide that much security, so you should look for some third party which is going to give you the support for security. So it says if certain features are missing or they are below average. So ultimately, if the cloud provider security people are better than yours, then you should look for security from the third party. The web services interface do not introduce too many new vulnerabilities. And the third is the provider aims at least as high as you can. So that means if certain features of your or certain requirements of your organization match with that of the cloud service provider, we normally look for cloud service provider to provide the security services. So you have different deployment models. Based upon the different deployment models, we know that security, which deployment model is going to provide how much security. So if you talk about public cloud, which is normally the best way of representing a cloud, in that particular case of cloud representation, the data or whatever application or services you have, they are owned by a third party, they are managed by a third party. It's not visible. So in that particular case, if you talk about public cloud, the infrastructure is managed by a third party. The example is Amazon. Now, in case of Amazon, whatever application or services you have, they are owned by Amazon. They are managed by Amazon. That means in this particular case, whatever security is provided, that is provided by the third party only. And the cloud is going to be off premises. You are not going to be the owner of the cloud. You are not going to host cloud in your organization. So that means we consider this sort of cloud to be the untrusted sort of cloud. So normally when you talk about cloud, public cloud is that particular cloud. Okay. So whenever we say that we are talking about security issues in cloud, basically it means we are talking about security issues in public cloud. With private or community cloud, it is going to be an organization which is going to own that particular cloud. It may be managed by some third party or by the organization or from one of the organization within the group. It is going to be on premises or it may be off premises. But in this particular case, we say that the security is going to be the best thing that will be provided by this particular cloud. But again, time and cost is going to be a factor. When you look for public cloud, the time to deploy cloud is very less. Time required basically. The cost required is very less, but security is also very less. With reference to private cloud, the time requirement is high to deploy such cloud. Cost requirement is high, but if you talk about security, that is also high. In case of hybrid, it is going to be a combination of both public and private, because what we normally do is for secure communication and secure applications, we use private cloud. And whenever I have overloaded systems, we try to migrate the computations from private cloud to the public cloud. So that migration is also there with the help of some trusted links only. So in this particular case, it is going to be owned both by the organization or by the third party, managed by the same. It may be on premises or off premises. And in this particular case, you have intermediate level of trust. I guess this is what you have already discussed. Now, if we talk about the benefits of cloud, according to a survey by Right Scale, they have listed some of the benefits of cloud, among which scalability and faster access to infrastructure. These two are the top most benefits of cloud, according to a survey of 2015. And the least one in this particular case was move capex to opex. That means we have moved or shifted the capital expenditure to operational expenditure. So initially the cost requirement is less. Over the due course of time, you are going to invest more in your day-to-day applications. From the same survey, when we talk about the security challenges, the very first security challenge that comes into picture is security. So that means whatever number of respondents they had, maximum number of respondents, they feel like security is a major challenge whenever you are going to have a cloud for your organization. That means if I'm going to use a public cloud for my application hosting, let's suppose I am a developer, I develop an application and I host it on a public cloud. So in that particular case, what you have is you have actually outsourced everything to a third party. Now, if your code, data, everything goes in the form of a plain text, that means any administrator or the work or the employees of the cloud service providers, they have access to your data. That means the cloud service provider can access your data, your information may be revealed. We have attacks possible, we have different attacks existing already. There was an organization called Target. The organization was hacked in 2014 December. So around 40 million records, they were hacked and revealed. Now the basic problem is if your data existing on, if your organization's data, whatever data you have, medical records or your financial records, if that record is present in the cloud in plain text, so anyone can have access to that particular information. So once your system is hacked, or if you have an intruder within your system, so in that particular case, security of your application, security of your organization is gone. So security is one of the major concerns. Then next to it, you have the compliance issues. Compliance issue says, whenever I'm going to outsource my data onto the cloud, cloud service provider needs to provide me with some certain level of reliability. And we all know the only best possible measure to provide reliability is redundancy. That means I am going to have replicas of the same data. Now, one of the replica is there in India. Second replica, let's suppose it is in America. So that means which law is going to apply on my data? That is again a matter of debate. Whether it is going to be a law of India, whether it is going to be the laws of America, or it should be the laws of the country in which the organization exists. So you do not have clear-cut rules for that. So compliance is again, you have organizations which deal with the compliance rules like PCI DSS, they look for the credit card information. You have HIPAA, which looks for the medical records and all. So they have certain guidelines. So whenever we talk about dealing with organizations or cloud service providers, it is normally considered that whenever you are going to sign an agreement between you or an organization and the cloud service provider, you should look for the compliance related issues. With reference to other issues, compliance related issues should also be there. The third is governance. Who is actually going to control my data? Who is actually going to be the owner of the data? Now, when I say, assuming Facebook, I upload one of my photograph on Facebook account. Okay. Now that photograph from my system is transferred onto the infrastructure of the cloud service provider or to the Facebook owners. Now, who is the owner of that particular file? I as an individual, or Facebook, whatever infrastructure they are providing to me, they are going to be the owner of that particular image, photograph of mine. So that is again something which needs to be considered. Now, at the same time, assume that 10 of my friends, they share that particular photograph on their home page. Now, those 10 of my friends can also be the owner because they have also shared that particular photograph that is also there on their home page. So, in that particular case, the governance of that particular data comes into play. So, there should be certain laws, which rules that define who is actually going to be the owner of that particular information or that particular data. So, we do not have certain rules till then. So governance and other are performance is there, cost is there, and how to actually manage data from multiple cloud service providers, and of course the lack of expertise or resources is also. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. I can release in can be. Yeah. So, matlab, it is one of the topic on which things are can be done. Actually. So, governance is one such issue. So, again, with reference, it can remove it. So again, if you talk about replicas, so if I say I have uploaded one of the photograph on any cloud service provider, they have actually replicated it 10 times, let's suppose, hypothetical example. So in that particular case, if I delete it from that particular site, will that data be deleted from all the 10 nodes? We don't know. You have concept of deactivating your accounts and again activating it back. The moment I deactivate it, that information is actually stored somewhere because I can reactivate my account. So the moment I reactivate my account, I get entire information back. That means my information is stored somewhere even if I deactivate or delete my account. Some of the cloud service providers, they give you the means concept of deleting your account for fixed number of days. If you reactivate it, so again your information will be back, otherwise your information is deleted. Pardon? Kind of archives. So the moment you go for archives, so in that particular case your information is there. So if your information is in plain text, security will always be there. So these are some of the issues when we talk about cloud. So according to few respondents, 41% of the respondents, they basically feel that cloud security is one of the significant challenge if you talk about cloud, adopting cloud for your organization. So when we talk about cloud security, the basic problem with cloud security is that the traditional methods, whatever methods you have for your network, these methods fail in case of cloud. So John Camber, he is the CEO of Cisco. He said that cloud computing is a security nightmare and it cannot be handled with the traditional methods. Because if you talk about traditional methods of authentication, it says I'm going to provide username and password, valid. But if I'm going to have a cloud service provider, it gives me username password combination, and the back end, the administrator of the cloud service provider can access my data. I go for authorization. I'll say, okay, for this particular users, if I have 20 users, 10 users can have access to financial data, 10 will not have access to financial data. Now, the intruder is sitting somewhere in the cloud service provider's organization. He or she may access that particular data. So that means whatever the methods we have for the traditional network security, they are not complete or they cannot be directly applied for the cloud security. Such as the traditional methods such as identity management, authentication and authorization are no longer enough for cloud in the current form. So if you talk about the cloud fear, it says that I'm going to actually move my critical applications and sensitive data to the public environment. So moving that data from your organization to the third party, it actually increases the surface attack surface area. Now the attack surface area says if I have a single isolated system, let's suppose X, I'm actually going to have entire data onto that particular system. So if that system is compromised, then only the security is compromised. But if I have internet facility on that particular internet, then the security issues or vulnerabilities increase. I may have attacks from internet. Now, if I outsource that particular data from my infrastructure to a third party infrastructure, now in that particular case, what happens is the data may be compromised at my system. It may be compromised during the transmission. It may be compromised at the cloud service provider's end. So that means I have increased the area on which you can have the data security issues or your data can be hacked. So basically, when you are going to migrate your data, so you are actually increasing the surface area of it. So cloud service providers must ensure that the customers will continue to have the same control on the applications. That means I should have the same control on my application and data as if I own the infrastructure. The same control should be there. I should have evidence to the customers that the organizations are secure, they meet certain service level agreements and provide compliance to the auditors. That means if I am going to outsource anything from my organization to a third party, in that particular case, the compliance laws will be there, security issues will be dealt properly, everything will be mentioned clearly in the service level agreement. So that is basically the requirement of cloud computing. So if you talk about security in this SPA model, that is SaaS, PaaS and IaaS model, it is the moment I go from one model to another model, the security challenges they are going to change. Talking about IaaS, that is infrastructure as a service, the cloud service provider only gives me the infrastructure. Storage will be provided, processors will be provided. Now on that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my own softwares. The development environment is going to be mine. Now, if I go for some pirated software, there is a possibility that the software is already compromised. You have some virus, Trojan horse into that particular development software. The moment you take that software to your infrastructure or to the cloud service provider's infrastructure, that means that is going to be a security drawback. So that means IaaS, the infrastructure security is the responsibility of the cloud service provider. Whatever software I am going to deploy on that particular infrastructure, that is going to be my responsibility as a developer or as an organization member. So if I am going to have that particular software and that software is not a trusted software, security flaws will be there. Now I am going to develop an application onto it, and that application is, let's suppose, not secure. So in that particular case, I'll have security challenges with reference to applications. So with IaaS, I get the least security because service provider is only looking for infrastructure security. Now, whatever on that I am on top of infrastructure I am going to have, that is going to be a security challenge. For PaaS, where I get the development environment also, the responsibility of cloud service provider increases because he is going to look for the infrastructure, he is going to look for the development environment. I am just going to look for my applications. So if I'm looking for my application, I need to look for the security of that particular application. We have tools for it. I've already talked about WebScan. So WebScan is a software which can be used for testing the security flaws in your application. And the third is SaaS. If we talk about software as a service, everything from the infrastructure to the development environment to the software or the application or the services is provided by the service provider. Now, if everything is provided by the cloud service provider, it is going to be the responsibility of cloud service provider to give security. I am just responsible for my data. That means I am responsible for the end user who is going to enter data. I am responsible for whatever data I am going to enter into the cloud. So that means in this particular case, we get the maximum security. Considering, let's suppose, Gmail. Now, Gmail, it comes as SaaS. I have an interface. Using that interface, I create an email. I forward that email to any user XYZ. Now, the moment I forward it, I assume that whatever application is developed by Gmail, that is going to be secure. Whatever platform they use, that is going to be secure. Whatever infrastructure they use, that is going to be secure. But if tomorrow some third party XYZ comes into picture and say that we are providing some services with reference to mailing facility, so I'll definitely look for whether they have security measures in their application from the platform point of view and from the infrastructure point of view. So the moment you are going to move from this SPI model, you move upwards, the security issues, the security features, they increase. That means the strength of security features increase because CSP is going to provide you with those particular features. So SaaS itself, it says that the burden of security lies with the cloud service provider. SaaS users have less control over the security. SaaS model is based on high degree of integrated functionalities, and some of the concerns are application related security, multi-tenancy, data security, and accessibility. Now, the moment we talk about application security, it says if your application is provided by SaaS, it is going to be a secure application because they are looking for whatever possible vulnerabilities or threats there are. They are going to have some concerns for that. They are looking for some measures to overcome that. Multi-tenancy says I am going to have multiple tenants sharing the same resource. Now, using this, you have something called as cross VM attacks. That means from one virtual machine, I can have attack onto some other virtual machine which is going to use the same resource. So multi-tenancy gives rise to cross VM attacks. Again, data security will be an issue because I'm actually going to migrate my data. And accessibility says we have different devices. I can access my data using a laptop, using a computer, using my mobile phone. Now, if you talk about your mobile phone, we all are in a habit of using apps. Now, the moment you download some app, you say I confirm and you continue using that particular application, you don't know what sort of data is being collected. That means it is possible that your entire information, whatever exists in your mobile phone, that is being collected, that may be used for your behavioral analysis. Like you have the concept in case of Facebook. The moment you go to some site, let's suppose Flipkart, you search for a pair of slippers. The next time you open your Facebook account, you get advertisements of slippers on your homepage. Now, what your Facebook does, it actually looks for your behavior. That means what you are actually doing. So based upon that behavior, you get response. You have the concept of getting news flash on your Gmail. That is again your behavioral analysis. That means they look for what sort of topic you are interested into. If you're interested in sports, the information related sports will be flashed onto your screen. If you're interested in Bollywood, information related to Bollywood will be displayed. So depending upon your behavior, the information is tabbed and then it is provided. So accessibility is also going to be a concern. So I can access application from any possible device. So if I can access application from any possible device, there are possibilities that there may be security flaws into it. With reference to application security, it says that most of the applications they are provided using the web browsers. So there is a possibility of vulnerabilities into that particular application. Now it says the web is used to compromise users' computer and perform certain activities like stealing the sensitive information. And the last is you have OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project. Now they normally come up with the security issues in web applications. They have top 10 threats, in which one of the threat is your cross scripting or SQL injections are there. So they have listed top 10 threats to your web application. So with reference to multi-tenancy, I have already talked about with reference to when you are going to have multiple tenants sharing the same infrastructure. In that particular case, you are going to have cross VM attacks. Now, when we talk about multi-tenancy, you have different scenarios for it. Now, the very first scenario is that each customer is going to have its own customized instance of the software. That means I'll get my copy of software from this cloud service provider. Now that copy is going to have different infrastructure, different resources. Now if I am going to use such kind of a scenario, in that particular case I am going to have the maximum security. But again, scalability is going to be an issue, because I'll have to tailor my software according to the requirement, and then I'll have to provide that software to everyone. Now if you have maintenance, so that needs to be provided to every user. Okay, for patches, so I'll have to provide patches to every individual or every user. So that is going to be the first scenario. Second scenario says the vendor provides different instances of the applications for each customer. That means for every customer I am going to just give an instance. Now in the backend, the code is going to be the same. The application running behind is going to be the same. Now everyone is going to have a different instance. It is something like creating a thread for different users. Normally when you are going to have online chat, so the moment you click onto the user X, a new window pops up. So it's creating a thread for that particular user only. So in this particular, again, customer can change some configuration options according to their requirements. And the third scenario is I'm going to have a single instance only, and that single instance will be used by all the users. Now in this particular case, you are going to have the least security. So security comes into picture, because you are going to increase the number of tenants. The moment you increase the number of tenants or the number of users, in that particular case, you are going to have resource sharing. The moment I share my resources, so in that particular case, I can have different possibilities of attack. So with reference to data, SaaS relies on the security provided by the provider only. Now the everything is stored in case of SaaS as plain text. So one of the measure to have data security is to encrypt your information. Now again, encryption is, it can be done in different ways. One is to again rely on the cloud service provider. My cloud service provider says I'll encrypt your data before storing it. But again, there is a possibility that during the transit only the data is compromised. So in that case, what you can do is, on the customer's end, you are actually going to encrypt the data, and then you are actually going to share that data with the cloud service provider. Now again, with that you have different issues. If I am going to encrypt my data, outsource my encrypted data onto the cloud, now I want to share any file X with any third user. How am I going to manage that sharing of resources? So again, that is a problem. How am I going to look for what information I am searching for? Let's suppose I have a large amount of data, I encrypt it, outsource it onto the cloud. I need to download a file X. Now how am I going to find out that this particular file is X file? So again, that is going to be a problem. So you have different researches into the in these domains. So under this, the security issues, we have different under the searching on encrypted data, we have work done by different researchers. With sharing of resources, we have work being done by different researchers. Data backup is also an issue, that where your backup of data will be maintained, whether it will be in your country so that the laws of your country are applicable, or it is going to be in some other country. Again, when we talk about the cloud, the next problem could be that cloud service provider may in turn look for some third party for the services. That means if the archives are to be created, they look for some third party, subcontractors in that particular case. They are going to pass their data, your data, to that subcontractor, so that that subcontractor can create an archive of it. So again, that is a issue. So with accessibility, it says if you are going to access the application using different devices, in that particular case, you can have issues like information stealing, mobile malware. That means you have certain viruses in your devices itself, mobile devices. You have insecure networks. That means you are using Wi-Fi network, and that particular whatever information is passed, that is passed as such open. You have vulnerabilities in whatever device you use, the operating system of that device, or whatever other applications are there in your mobile. You have insecure marketplaces, and you have proximity based hacking. That means when we say that I'm going to have a ad hoc network being created, normally you have. So when you are actually looking for certain down application or certain webs or video streaming, so normally what happens is all the users which are in proximity, okay, to you or to your mobile device, you are actually using the resources. Now we don't know that, but the moment we click onto I agree and continue, we actually pass or we actually say that I give cloud service provider the luxury that cloud service provider can use my mobile phone for such sort of creating such sort of networks. So normally that is also a possibility where you can have attacks. So this is with reference to SaaS. With reference to PaaS, as already discussed, I am going to extend my control on data. That means cloud service provider is going to have less responsibility as compared to SaaS. With PaaS user, I am going to have the user is going to have more control over the data. Now with PaaS, you have all the issues of SaaS into the PaaS also. That means for SaaS, we have discussed different issues like accessibility, data security, application security. These issues will there be in PaaS also, and PaaS itself is going to have certain issues. So whenever you have a model, so the next level model is going to inherit the drawback of the previous level. Like it says for PaaS, you have two types of security issues. One is the security of the PaaS platform. Whatever platform I get, for that particular platform, I am going to have security flaws. Second is I may have security flaws in the application, whatever application I'm going. So each cloud security model comprises its own inherent security flaws. However, they also share some challenges that affect all of us. So security concerns with PaaS are third-party relationship, development of life cycle and underlying infrastructure security. Third-party relationship, it says, I am going to have the development environment from some party, third party. I'll get softwares from some third party. The moment I get softwares, development softwares from third party, there may be some security flaw into it. Development life cycle, I am actually going to change my application again and again. The moment I update my application, there is a possibility that some security flaws come into picture. The moment you update the code, you may have some security challenges, and again the infrastructure security is going to be an issue. So the very first is your third party relationship. You have risk because of the third party. PaaS not only provides traditional programming languages but also offers third party web service components such as mashups. Now what happens in case of mashup is you are going to have services from different users, providers, and you are going to integrate it into a single component. So mashup is going to combine more than one source element into a single integrated unit. So using that mashup, I am actually going to provide services. So the PaaS model is going to inherit the security issues pertaining to the mashups. That means whatever intermediate components you are going to link, so whatever components you are going to link, if any security flaw exists in that particular component, that is going to come up in your integrated. Underlying infrastructure security is whatever the infrastructure is provided by your IaaS provider. So if that infrastructure security is not provided efficiently, or that is not a good security provided, that is there. But still, if I'm going to have an application on PaaS, I say that with PaaS, my application needs to be secure, my platform needs to be secure, but infrastructure it also needs to be secure. That is going to be the responsibility of CSP. Yeah, that is what I say, sir. SaaS issues, they are going to come to PaaS issues. Whatever issues you have with reference to application, they'll come to PaaS. Whatever issues you have with reference to PS, platform issues, they'll come to SaaS also. If your platform is not secure, then your application will not be secure. It's vice versa. So with the development life cycle, we say that the developers, they should know that whenever you are going to update the source code, it should be secure. The speed at which the application will change, that is going to affect the development life cycle and the security. The developers also need to understand any change in the platform, it is going to be a security issue. Developers need to be educated about the legal issues, data legal issues. That is what we discussed, the governance and all. The location where I am going to store the data. Now, data may be stored in different places. It may be under different legal jurisdictions. So that is again going to compromise the privacy. Underlying infrastructure. So whatever infrastructure is provided by your cloud service provider, the security of that is also an issue. So it says providers are responsible for securing the underlying infrastructure. Developers do not have the assurance that the development environment tools provided by the PaaS providers are secure. So both PaaS and SaaS, they are multi-tenants. So from multi-tenancy, you are going to have the security issue. The next is IaaS, infrastructure as a security service issues. Now the first thing is, if you talk about IaaS, I'm just going to provide you with the infrastructure as a service provider. So whatever platform you are going to have, that is yours. Whatever application you have, that is going to be yours. So security of both application and platform is your responsibility. So now in this case, in case of IaaS, user is going to have full control on the software. Which software I am going to use, which software I am not going to use, that is I am going to have control over it. Cloud users have better control over the security as compared to the other models. That means I am going to provide whatever level of security I need for my application and the platform. They control the software running in the virtual machines, and they are responsible to configure the policies. That means whatever security policies I am going to use, that is going to be my responsibility. Cloud service provider is only responsible for the underlying network and the storage. We all are familiar with virtualization. So what is virtualization? It's abstraction, or it is something which is not existing in reality. So now when we say that virtualization, with virtualization, what you are going to do is you are going to create logical resources, and you are going to provide those logical resources to every user machine instance. So every instance is going to have its own logical resource, but underlying physical resource is going to be same. So with reference to virtualization also, we have some of the security issues. Now one of the security issue could be about the security of the hypervisor. We have hypervisors that is going to monitor the creation of virtual machines, how resources are allocated to the virtual machines. Everything is controlled by the hypervisor. Now if the hypervisor is not secure, again virtual or whatever security you are going to provide to the system, that is going to be compromised. So with virtualization comes again the next domain of security issues. It says it introduces new opportunities for attackers because of the extra layer that is provided because of that particular hypervisor. Whether you go with type 1, whether you go for type 2, any type of hypervisor you go for, you are going to have an extra layer. Now that if the hypervisor is not secure, so the security of your entire infrastructure, application, platform, everything is compromised. Any flaw in either the physical or the virtual machine is going to affect. Virtualized environments are vulnerable to all the types of attack as the normal infrastructure. Whatever attacks are possible into your existing network, they are all possible into the cloud. Plus, you have some add-ons because of multi-tenancy, because of virtualization and all. So you have the concept of VMM, that is your virtual machine monitor, that is going to monitor whatever information is needed. Now, if the VMM is compromised, in that particular case, whatever information is collected or monitored, that can be compromised. Similar to traditional software, that means whatever issues you can have for your normal software applications, they all are possible with your VMMs. Virtualization, it introduces the ability to migrate virtual machines between the physical. Now you have concept of offloading. Now under offloading, what we do is we are actually going to migrate one of the virtual machine from one physical resource to another physical resource. Okay. Now in that particular case, when you are actually migrating your virtual machine, there is a possibility that during this particular migration itself, your virtual machine is hacked, or your information, whatever is being passed, that is hacked. So in this particular case, again, security is going to be a problem. So it says it is going, virtualization gives you the ability to, so that you can migrate, but an attacker can compromise the migration module in the VMM and transfer a victim virtual machine. That means what is being done is you are actually transferring a virtual machine from system X to Y. Now that virtual machine, copy of the VMM virtual machine is replaced with a compromised copy. Now the compromised copy is transferred to the new system. It is being used, so that is going to give you the security flaws. VM migration, it exposes the content of the virtual machine also to the network. So when you're within the network, virtual machine is going to flow, the information is going to be revealed. And a malicious virtual machine can be migrated to another host, compromising it also. That means if I'm going to have a virtual machine which is compromised and I take it to a new infrastructure, I can launch cross VM attacks from there also. So I can have security issues with other hosts that exist on the same network. So you have the next concept of shared resources. Since we are going to have sharing of resources in case of cloud, so what I can do is, if the memory is being shared, I can override the data. Whatever resources you are going to share, you can actually manipulate those resources to launch certain type of attacks. So it says VM located on same CPU server can share the CPU, memory or IO devices. Sharing resources between the VMs can decrease the security. A malicious virtual machine can infer some information about other virtual machines through shared memory or other resources without need of compromising the hypervisor. That means I'm not going to have any security flaws into the hypervisor. Hypervisor is going to give me the best security. But what I do is, whatever resources are being shared, I'm going to have security flaws into those resources. I'm going to use those resources to launch attacks. Public VM repositories, it says you have, Amazon gives you the already existing VM images. Now what happens in that particular case is you can use the already existing images. Now what if an intruder creates an account, creates a virtual machine and saves an image of that particular machine? Now if I, as a user, I download that particular image on my system or onto the cloud, and I start using that particular image, or I create a virtual image using that image, in that particular case what will happen is, whatever security flaws the malicious user has integrated into the image, that will come into my system. So that is going to affect the security. So we have malicious users can store image containing malicious code into public repositories comprising other users or even the cloud system. An attacker with a valid account can create an image which can have Trojan horses into it. Now some confidential information such as passwords may be tapped and it can be sent to the malicious user. So that means your entire information is going to be compromised. Next to it is virtual machine rollback. Now what happens in case of virtual machine rollback is, I am going to roll back my virtual machine to some pre-state, that means already existing state. Now if you have the concept of rollback, for that rollback what you need to do is, you need to maintain a record. That means this was the state of my system at time t1. Now after some time t2, this is the state of my system. After some time t3, this is the state of my system. Now if I want to roll back my virtual machine to time slot t3, I'll use that particular information for rollback. Now that information may be revealed to third party. That means you are going to have log records kind of thing. So if you are going to maintain log records for your virtual machine, and if those log records are compromised, in that particular case, the virtual machine may reveal information. So that is what comes with your virtual machine rollback. In order to provide rollbacks, we need to make a snapshot or copy of the virtual machine, which can result in propagation of configuration errors and other vulnerabilities. VM lifecycle, that means we all know virtual machine is created, then we are actually having a virtual machine in running state, then you pause that particular virtual machine, then it is in waiting a pause state, then it comes to the either you stop it, then in that particular case it will be deleted and so on. So in every life cycle span, you are going to have security into it. Virtual networks are there. So in case of virtual networks also, you are going to provide the resource sharing. So the moment you provide resource sharing within that particular network, it is going to affect the security. So it says sharing resources allows attackers to launch cross-tenant attacks. Most hypervisors are virtual networks to link the virtual machines to communicate directly. So if you are going to use the virtual networks for the VMs to communicate, and if that network is somehow compromised, the entire security of the system is compromised. So these are some of the issues with reference to software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. So in the next, we'll talk about the security vulnerabilities. What vulnerabilities do I have in my system? It is just going to be somehow recap of what we have discussed, but now we are going to actually divide things into different sort of vulnerabilities. We have around 7 vulnerabilities. So the very first vulnerability that comes is insecure interfaces and APIs. That means if as an application as a service, if you talk about software as a service, sorry, I design an application, example Facebook, I give that particular application to you. Now that application gives you an interface, user interface. It says enter your mobile number or email ID and password and then click login to continue. Now if let's suppose the developers, what they do is you enter a email ID, you do not enter a password, you click on to submit, you get a response like password is incorrect. Now from this, an attacker can know that the username is valid because the message itself says password is incorrect. Second option is I give a username password combination, I click on to login, it says email ID is incorrect. That means there is a possibility that password is correct. So that means whatever interface you have for your application, you need to look for that particular interface is a secure interface. Whatever interface you have with reference to your application, that is not going to reveal any extra information. Any confidential information should not be revealed. Now, there can be a concept of weak credentials. There can be a problem of insufficient authorization checks. That means you do not have code for proper authorization testing. You have insecure input data validation. That means whatever data comes into your application, you have not checked it. You have directly sent that data to the database. Now there is a possibility that that data is malicious data. So you need to test that also. Second vulnerability is unlimited allocation of resources. That means you create a virtual machine, you create an application or an instance of that application which is going to take all the resources of your system. That means all the resources will be utilized by that particular machine only. So that is going to be a problem, which you call it as denial of service attack. So in that particular case, what you are going to do is you are going to eat up the resources of the service provider. The moment I say I'm going to eat up the resources of service provider, the service provider cannot provide resources to any other party. So there is a possibility you have unlimited allocation of resources also. The next vulnerability is data related vulnerability. The very first issue is data can be co-located with the data of unknown owners, leading to weak separation. That means that particular application is used by thousands of users. Now, I as a user enter my data, someone else also is entering data. The data goes and stores into a single same repository. There is a possibility that I can have attacks with that also. Data may be located in different jurisdictions which have different laws, compliance related issues. Incomplete data deletion is also there. We discussed about Facebook and all. I said if I delete my account or if I delete an image, so will it be deleted from all the nodes that have replicated it? We don't know. Data backup done by untrusted third party. That is, untrusted third party is going to provide you with the archive facility. Information about the location of data is unavailable or not disclosed to other users. That means I do not know that where my data is actually stored. And data is often stored, processed, and transferred in plain text. So these are some of the issues which are related to data. Next is your vulnerabilities in virtual machines. That means there is a possibility you have different types of vulnerabilities with the VMs. The very first is possible covert channel in the co-location of VMs, unrestricted allocation and deallocation of resources to VMs, uncontrolled migration. That means I'm going to migrate it. VMs can be migrated from one server to another due to fault tolerance, load balancing, anything. So we discussed how information leakage can be there when you are actually going to migrate your VM from one system to another. Uncontrolled snapshots. That means you are going to have the images of your virtual machine with some Trojan horses embedded into it. Uncontrolled rollbacks can be there, and VMs have IP addresses that are visible to anyone within the cloud. So attackers can use these IP addresses to launch attacks. Next vulnerability is with the VM images. We have already talked about vulnerabilities in images. If a malicious user creates a image, that is going to be a vulnerability. Vulnerabilities in hypervisors do exist. That means you have complex hypervisor codes and you have an extra layer of hypervisor that needs to be secure. And the last is vulnerabilities in virtual networks. Whatever virtual networks you are going to create, they need to be secure. Threats related to the security. That means the very first threat is your account or service hijack. That means whatever service you are looking for, whatever account you have created, that is going to be hacked. Now if that is being hacked, for that you have different methods. One of the method is social engineering. That means you try to behave as if you are a friend with someone and try to extract the information. So that is called as social engineering. So using social engineering, you may try to have the information about users. Like normally we are in a habit of creating accounts with password as date of birth. Now if date of birth is password, that information can be obtained from your Facebook account. So I may get to know that this is your date of birth from your Facebook account, and I may try different permutations of that particular password. Now your application should be such that after fewer number of failure attempts, it should not provide me that I can test new passwords. So that means after 3 incorrect attempts, my application should not permit me any sort of login. So that is account hijacking is there. Data scavenging is there. That means your cloud service provider is out. The data cannot be completely removed from the device is destroyed. Attackers may be able to recover that data. That means whatever devices you have where you have stored your data, okay, now you have deleted that data, but you have few traces of that particular data. We have softwares, even if your data is deleted from the hard disk, that can be recovered. Recovery softwares are there. Similarly, if you delete some data from your cloud service provider, it is possible that that data can be recovered again. So that is a problem. Data leakage, that means the data may be leaked from wherever it is being stored. Denial of service, that means you are denied from any sort of service. Customer data manipulation, that means the data may be manipulated with the help of any methods like SQL injections or cross-site scriptings. VM escape can be there. That is, whatever hypervisor you are going to use, you are going to look for vulnerabilities into it. VM hopping, that means you are going to have virtual machines to gain access. It happens when a VM is able to gain access to another virtual machine. Malicious VM creation, we have already talked about it. Insecure VM migration, that means I'm going to migrate it, and that is not in insecure manner. I can have a VM onto an untrusted host. I can have a malicious VM being migrated, and the last is sniffing or spoofing attacks are also possible in case of virtual networks. So how your threats and vulnerabilities are related? Like, you have a vulnerability of insecure interfaces and APIs. Now, using this insecure interface and API vulnerability, you may have a threat called as your account hijack. That means I create an interface. It takes username, password. I click on to submit button. Let's suppose the username and password is displayed in the URL. I transfer it using get method. That means anyone who can read that particular URL can extract information, and my account may be hijacked. So that means whatever interface you design, it should be secure enough, and you should have methods of identity management and access management in addition to dynamic credentials. That means there are certain systems which come up with change of password after every month. After every month, you need to change. After a particular time slot, you need to change your password, and that password cannot be the same as your previous password. So that means every time you need to come up with new credentials. How am I going to store your passwords in the backend? That also needs to be considered. If it is stored as a plain text, in that particular case, if your database is hacked, every information will be revealed. Second vulnerability can be incomplete data deletion. Incomplete data deletion can lead to data scavenging attack. We talked about how if your data is not, even if it is deleted, it can be recovered. So if the data is replicated on 10 sites, if you delete it and it is deleted from, let's suppose, 6 sites only, that means the remaining 4 sites may reveal your information. Then you have data related vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities lead to threats as data leakage. Now, if you want to overcome this, the best method is encryption. Go for digital signatures, go for encryptions. We also have a concept of homomorphic encryptions. Now, what happens in case of homomorphic encryptions is, if you talk about encryption, let's suppose I need to process that information. Now, what happens is, as a user, I encrypt my data, outsource it onto the cloud. Now, any party X wishes to, let's suppose, get some file X from the service provider. That means I give the luxury to the third party that you can share that particular file. Now, the cloud service provider needs to do some sort of pre-processing onto that particular search. One of the method is give the keys to the cloud service provider. Now, in that particular case, cloud service provider is going to use that particular key, decrypt the data, process it, and then again encrypt it back and transfer it to the third party. Now, if I give the keys to the cloud service provider, that means whatever is the benefit of encryption, that is gone. So homomorphic encryption, it gives you the benefit that you can have operations on encrypted data itself. That means I have encrypted data using any key. I just want to have certain operations like addition of that particular information. I just want to have multiplication. So these operations are possible using homomorphic encryption. So these measures can be used to avoid data leakage. The next vulnerability is unlimited allocation of resources. Now this may lead to denial of service attack. DOS attacks. Insecure APIs can also lead to customer data manipulation. That means you can manipulate the data. Vulnerabilities in hypervisor may lead to VM escape. Unrestricted allocation and deallocation of resources can lead to VM hopping, where you are actually going to go from one system to another. Vulnerabilities in VM images can lead to malicious VM creation. That means you can create virtual machines which are not secure. Then uncontrolled snapshots may be there. That means you are creating the archives of virtual machines that can lead to insecure VM migrations. And you can have vulnerabilities within the network, and that can lead to sniffing or spoofing attacks. So with reference to cloud security, if you talk about security, it can be broadly classified into three categories: architecture related, compliance related, and privacy related. Now, when we talk about architecture related, it includes three subcategories. Now, the architecture related security depends upon the network. Whatever network I am going to use, that network should be secure. So, whatever vulnerabilities you have in your network, they are going to affect the architecture, or they are going to affect the security of the cloud. The interfaces which I am going to use for the information exchange and virtualization is going to affect the security. So under security, it says transfer of security, firewalling, and security configurations, they need to be secure. For interfaces, whatever APIs I'm going to use, whatever interfaces I'm going to use, whether they are user interface, whatever authentication methods I'm going to use, they all need to be secure. And for virtualization, how am I going to maintain isolation? That means this one VM is isolated from another. How am I going to avoid the cross VM attacks? How am I going to maintain the data leakage? So everything needs to be considered. From the compliance related, you have two things. One is compliance with reference to the service. Second is compliance with reference to the provider. Now with reference to the service, you have SLAs. That means you are going to sign an agreement which says the application or the service will be provided for this much time. You will be provided with the support for e-governance. That means if there is an attack, you will be provided the support for that. Loss of service will not be there. You have audits facility, compliance facility there. With reference to provider, you need to talk about the data control. Who is going to control the data? Who is actually going to control security? And there is going to be a problem of lock-in with reference to the provider. With privacy, you have data and data issues and legal issues. Now, to overcome data issues, you have cryptography, encryption you are going to use. You are going to use redundancy so as to provide availability. And you have disposal. How am I going to dispose the data? But with reference to legal issues, you have data location. That means where my data will be located, where the replicas will be located. E-discovery, if an attack is there on your system, whether the support for the corresponding analysis is provided by the cloud service provider or not. That means if an attack is there, will you be provided with the support to look for the log records, that who has accessed the information, how come this attack come into picture. Providers privileges, that means what privilege the provider is going to have on your application, on your data. So that means we know the vulnerabilities that are there in the system. We know what are the possible threats that are in the system. We know that which vulnerability may lead to which threat. Now the point comes, how am I going to plan my security? So that is going to be a tough decision. So that means I need to decide what, when, and how to move to the cloud. That means as an organization owner or a security specialist or a cloud specialist, you need to decide on how security you are going to add into the cloud. That means I need to identify the asset for cloud deployment. That means I should know whether I'm going to move the application, whether I'm going to move some functions, whether I'm going to move some data onto the cloud. That means if I'm going to create an application, whether only the data of the application data will go to the cloud, application will go to the cloud, or some functionality will go to the cloud. So you need to decide onto that. Now, when we talk about identifying the assets, you need to identify migrating which resource onto the cloud is going to give you the risk. That means if I talk about an educational institute, now as an educational institute, if I transfer the name of the students who are studying in the campus or in the institute to the cloud, in that particular case there is going to be very little security flow. But now let's suppose in addition to the name of the student, I also transfer the address, their phone number, their email ID, everything onto the cloud. Just a minute. So in that particular case, what happens is if I'm going to transfer everything, so the competitor party may look for, okay, this is the particular district from which the institute is having the maximum number of students. So next time I need to advertise in that particular district. So that means depending upon what data you are actually going to outsource to your cloud, you have risk associated to it. Just transferring the name of the student is of little risk, but transferring the entire information of the student may be risky. Similarly, transferring the entire financial information of your infrastructure to the cloud is going to be more risky. So depending upon that, you need to identify which information you need to transfer to the cloud. Apart from that, you need to evaluate the risk. So what is the risk associated with migrating that particular data? Then map the assets to the development model. Which development model I'm going to use? I'm going to use private cloud. So that is going to give me the best security. I am going to use community cloud, again the best security. But if I go for a public cloud, in that particular case, the entire information is available. So that can be accessed by anyone. So in that particular case, you need to look for the resources. You need to look for what is the risk associated with migrating it. You need to look for the deployment model you are going to use. Then look for the delivery model. Whether you are going to use software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service. Again, you have security issues with that. And last is you are going to look for the cloud service provider itself. Cloud service provider is a new one or an old cloud service provider. If the service provider is a new service provider, then the cloud service provider may or may not guarantee security. So you need to look for that. So overall, you have different issues or areas in which you have security. The very first is where your data will be stored. The database that needs to be secure. If your data is being transferred in transit, that needs to be secure. Authentication should be proper. Authentication should be provided using user interfaces. You should have separation of authentication and data for different users. Then you should have legal issues. And the last is incidents reporting should also be included. So you have different, these 6 domains are the broad domains in which you need to have security. So this is all about the fundamental security issues with reference to cloud. In case you have any doubts, so do let me know. We'll discuss post session. Thank you.